Welcome to the 28th episode of the second season of The Pulpiteer. I'm your host, Eric Hepburn, and I'm glad to have you join us for today's episode. Today's episode is called Simone Weil's Decreation. It is the third and final episode in our three-part Simone Weil series honoring Women's History Month. Today we'll focus on part of her theory of decreation. We'll begin this week with our Great World House segment and Word of Wisdom, delivered by Kelly McGinty. Now we pause to honor the great world house of which we are a part, lifting up the needs, the hopes, and the voices beyond these doors. And usually in this segment, I relate our work here to some news item or current event, and those are useful connections to make. But today I want to connect us to something older, something both more profound and more grounding. This past Friday, March 20th, was the spring equinox. So the Great World House invitation this morning is not to a polis or an event, but to nature herself, to the expanding, rotating universe of which we are a part, to the stardust of which we are all made, to the cycles of life and light, love and gravity, death and compost that are our truest, deepest ecology. That is what Equinox honors. And Kelly and I are going to now do a brief Equinox ritual.
In the pagan tradition, which is grounded in respect and reverence for the natural world, calling upon the four directions is the usual way to begin any ceremony. Each direction is associated with an element of the natural world and represents some part of our human nature as well. The directions are not seen as separate and isolated, but rather as part of the interdependent system that makes up the world. Every tradition has their own way of beginning. Different spiritual paths start with different directions, but for the purposes of today, we will be starting in the east, toward the rising sun. The element of the east is air, represented by a feather oftentimes. Air and breath give us life. It is the direction of inspiration, the word that literally means to take in air. The east is associated with the mind, with knowledge and learning and intellectual curiosity. Imagine the birds turning and wheeling in the air. Imagine the breeze blowing through your hair. Turning toward the east, we look for a fresh start, an invigorating breath, a new idea. When you are feeling stuck in a rut, beholden to a routine, or if the wind has gone out of your sails, look to the east. We move around the wheel to the south. The element of the south is fire, which can be represented by the flame of a candle or a chalice. Fire is a transformative force. It is heat and light and powerful change. In the northern hemisphere, it makes sense that we associate the south towards the equator with the warmth of the sun and the heart of the flame. We see birds move south, butterflies move south, whales move south, seeking warmer places when the weather gets cold. When our internal weather gets cold, turning south is a metaphor for turning toward the warmth and daylight, seeking out the changes that will warm us up, get our blood moving, call us out of the winters of our lives, out of hibernation and into action. Continuing around the circle, we arrive at the west. The element of the west is water, typically placed on an altar in a cup or chalice. In the west, we are drawn into the experience of our emotions. It is a direction that calls for us to self-reflect and toward self-understanding. Our emotions move in us like water, flowing through our lives, sometimes calm and sometimes turbulent, but always flowing. When we dam up our feelings, just like when we dam up a river, the pressure builds until it finds an outlet. If you are seeking to get in touch with your inner life, with your emotions, turn toward the west. We now move to the north. The element of the north is earth. It can be represented with soil or crystals or rocks or plants. There is stability here, the ground of our being. The north represents the place that holds us, that allows us time and space to heal and grow, to feel nurtured and respected. It is also the place of embodiment, of connecting with our physical self, with the concrete and the tangible world around us. The north calls to you if you are seeking balance, the deep wisdom that lives within our bones, a place of rest and recovery. We have moved through the four directions, given them shape and meaning. East, air, breath, and inspiration. South, fire, transformation, and action. West, water, feeling, and reflection. North, earth, balance, and wisdom. When we sit in meditation, we can create more intention with our musings by focusing on a particular direction. We can bring deep meaning and connection to the world around us as we dive into what it is that we most desire for ourselves or for others. But what I really want to leave you with is that the directions have relevance. But the most important bit is what is directly in the middle of each of these directions. It is us. We are the center. We matter. Our lives matter. Our mental health matters. And what we love matters. The directions are meaningless without the center. And that is each and every one of us and the divinity within. Let us enter a still place within, opening our hearts and minds to receive the voice of wisdom. After the words are spoken, we will breathe together in silence, preparing ourselves for the word unfolding among us. We welcome a voice of wisdom, unpacking the work of Simone Weil. Mathematics show us that there are truths independent of human preference, that reality has structure we can discover, but not create, that the mind can grasp something beyond itself. This is education in the distinction between subjective desire and objective reality, between what we want and what is. The allegory of Plato's cave particularly resonates with Simone and her thoughts. Most humans are prisoners, chained in darkness, seeing only shadows of reality, mistaken these shadows for the real. Liberation requires being dragged forcibly out of the cave, a painful ascent into light that initially blinds, that requires time for the eyes to adjust before the sun can be seen. This is decreation, the painful process of leaving illusion behind, of allowing the ego's comfortable fictions to be destroyed so that reality can be encountered. And like in Plato, the person who achieves this must return to the cave, must try to liberate others, even knowing they will likely be ridiculed or killed for the attempt. And now we will breathe together.
I had to go look this up, so I'll do y'all the similar favor so you don't have to get your cell phones out. The allegory of Plato's cave is like this. Prisoners are chained in the cave. Their backs are to the fire, and their backs are to the entrance of the cave. All they can see where they're chained is the shadows of themselves, the flickering of the firelight, the changing sunlight from the entrance of the cave, and the shadows of their jailers as they move around their business. So they're staring at a blank canvas of a cave wall, and all they can see is the shadows. That is the extent of their experience of the world. One day, one of the prisoners is cut loose, and the guard drags him out past the fire, out of the cave into the sunlight. I'm sure you've all experienced that move from darkness into intense light where you are blinded for a little while. You can make out nothing, but then sense begins to return. And you start to make out color and detail, and the world unfolds before you as it is. Now imagine just for a moment that experience of life outside the cave, of birds in the sky, water running in the streams, green leaves on the trees, grasses on the plants, a butterfly, a flower, a piece of succulent fruit hanging from a branch, when all you've ever experienced is shadows on a wall. Disorienting is one word for it. Earth-shattering might be another. Whatever theories you had constructed about the nature of reality based at your intense study of the cave wall have been shown in their deep insufficiency to explain the breadth and depth of the complex world that surrounds you. The limitations of your own prior perspective revealed to you. And at some point, the acknowledgement of the paucity of the imprisoned condition compared to the liberation and freedom of life outside drives the released prisoner to know that they can't leave their friends behind. That there is no moral or ethical path that allows them to just walk free and leave their brothers and sisters and siblings chained in the cave. So they go back. And they try to explain to someone who's only ever seen shadows on a wall what a bluebonnet looks like, or an apple, or a mountain stream, or a cactus, or a lizard, or a mountain, or a sunset. How do you explain a sunset to someone who's only ever seen shadows on the wall of a cave? If we zoom out on this for a minute, we see that in our early lives, the scope of our perspective, which we necessarily use to build our mental model of how the world works and what it means and what's possible and what's not possible, as we grow older and mature and deep, when we recognize that the perspective that we had when we formed those early opinions about what life was and who we were in it and all of it was inadequate to the task. It was an inadequate perspective from which to build a comprehensive, holistic model of what life is. Not enough of it had unfolded for us to have data, for us to have enough reflective data about what was going on. Not enough prisoners had been released from our campfire and come back to report the news that we had enough hints about what might be out there beyond our currently limited perspective. And so most of us, as we age, we run into moments where reality comes bang up against our preconceptions. Amen? Has this happened to you? Has life come crashing in on how you thought things were or ought to be? So this is where, in a long tradition of mystics, from a great number of traditions, Simone Weil steps in and she calls this decreation. Eckhart Tolle calls it something else. In the Buddhist tradition, it is the revelation of the bodhisattva. The realization that at some point in your own personal liberation, you realize one of the last illusions to fall from you is the illusion you can do it by yourself. Is the illusion that you can go off by yourself without your siblings and it's going to be okay. It's one of the last illusions to fall. And then you realize not only can't you do it by yourself, but it's not even the true thing if it's by yourself. And you realize you don't know what's necessary, but if you don't go back for your siblings still chained in the cave, you haven't really gotten to liberation at all. You've heard me say from up here before, we're either doing this together or we're not doing it at all. And I'm committed to us doing it together. Simone Weil says this: we do not become just by adding virtue. We do not become just by adding virtue to ourselves, to our lives, to our worldview. We become just by subtracting the self that blocks reality. Now, I know she's a French philosopher. I know. Beth's looking at me like, wait, what? I'm going to say it 3 times in a row, slow, because it's not just you. But I appreciate you making the face at me so that I can have a little interlude and let it sink in before we move to the second iteration. We're doing this together. You feel me? We become just by subtracting the self that blocks reality. Now, I'm going to leave it to y'all to figure out how that works in the microcosm of your deepest, most intimate self, your relationship with your spouse, your children, brother, sister, sibling, mom, dad. That stuff's complicated. I can't cover that here. But let's talk about the micro is always a reflection of the macro. And we are in a geopolitical moment that we are all sharing right now. And we can talk about what it looks like at that collective level. We can talk about what it looks like to spend more time on the death of a handful of soldiers because they share your identity American than on hundreds of people who were killed who have some other national identity, and to blow that off like it's not important. Civilian enemy casualties this week were at X thousand people. 4 U.S. soldiers were killed this week in the attacks on Iran. Do you feel that differential? If you share the identity with them, they're important. If you don't share the identity with them, they're probably disposable people. Now we know that that's not true. But we also have to be honest with ourselves that that is what our culture still believes. Our culture still believes that some lives are worth more than others. That some lives are worth more than others. That is the self that blocks reality. The self that your identity means something. Anti-identitarianism is hard to preach. It's hard to preach for a couple reasons. One of them is the identities you've already decided you don't care about are easy, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally over that. I no longer believe that I'm better than all other religious practitioners in the world because I'm a UU and there's something else. Woohoo! Maybe. I've met some UUs who I don't think are there yet. I think they're still pretty convinced that their Unitarian Universalism makes them spiritually superior to most other practitioners who are not nearly as open-minded. In this place, in this day and time, whether you tolerate what's going on, whether you think it's some sort of weird necessary evil, whether you wholeheartedly object to it, your identity as American is getting triggered every day in an attempt to make you predictable to the powers that be. Well, Bob, now you wouldn't want to be seen questioning the value of our soldiers, would you? No, sir. No, sir, I would not. I would not. I honor our troops. Because to do less than that would be more than an act of rebellion. It would be akin to sabotage on some deep level. I do wonder deeply whether we are capable of holding identities without getting this superior thing wrapped in with it. Do you feel me? Like, can we be men without thinking that men are better than other kinds of people? Can we be women without thinking that women are better than other kinds of people? Can we be of different racial and ethnic and national origin backgrounds without conflating that with better than? Because the natural egoic tendency, I'm going to use that word to emphasize it, the egoic tendency is to cover up your insecurities with either a story of I'm the best, I'm the greatest, or I'm awful, I'm no good. So you're going to use one of those two kinds of stories. You're going to either talk about how terrible you are, or you're going to talk about how awesome you are. But they're both ways of keeping your ego alive to cover up your own insecurities. And what we want to grow past, the loosing of the chains that moves you from the shadow world to the real world, is letting go of all that. You're neither better or worse than anyone. Just not. And every thought you have along those lines is just something that happens to you the same way rain happens. It's part of the natural unfolding of the world. It's a completely human thing. You're not at fault for it. But you do get to choose what to do with it when it happens to you. When you have that thought about your own superiority or inferiority, you do get to choose how you respond to that moment. Nah, it's just a thought. It wasn't true. It wasn't my identity. It doesn't make me better. It doesn't make me worse. It just makes me a human being who suffers from thinking the way that all human beings suffer from thinking. So maybe we can take ourselves a little less seriously. We can take our identities a little less seriously. We can hold them a little more loosely so that they're not the thing that determines how we react in a situation. I've been preaching the last few weeks about us becoming spiritually alive and therefore unpredictable. A spiritually alive human shows up to what is and is unpredictable in their response in a way that a human being enwrapped in their identities is not. Because the identities tell you what you need to do in that moment. You're an American, so you should applaud that 2 orders of magnitude more of them died than of us. See, that is the math of celebration. A human gets to show up to that moment and deeply mourn that we're still making excuses for hurting and killing each other over shit that matters less than each of us. Another word for decreation, or should we say the practice that underlies decreation, of letting go of this self that gets in our way of showing up to reality, is disillusionment. It's one of my favorite words. Disillusionment is a spiritual technique. It's a practice. And here's what I want to focus on this. Disillusionment isn't despair, and it's not, oh, I was wrong in how I built my model. I'm going to just throw the whole thing out and act like I don't know what the hell's going on. It's neither of those things. It is precision. It is an act of precision. It's an act of saying, okay, I probably got some things right and some things wrong. I have to really deeply engage now and say, okay, which things? Which things did I get right and which things did I get wrong? And what is the unfolding story of my life and my relationships with other people like? What are they trying to teach me needs to change about my model? Where am I running into friction with people that doesn't feel like, some friction feels generative, right? I'm sitting at Big Bend out there in the middle of the night and it's 30 degrees and I'm doing this. That's generative friction, right? I'm like, oh, thank God I could rub my hands together because it is cold, right? And then there's the other kind of friction where I was hiking down the mountain and I'm like, boy, I could use a little bit less friction between my legs right here because, man, it's really hard to hike down this mountain with that much friction. So there's generative friction, and then there's debilitating friction. And discernment is the spiritual process where we get quiet long enough to notice the difference. Discernment is the spiritual practice where we get quiet enough to notice the difference between Jackie and I are having healthy friction in our relationship that's going to make us go deeper as a collaborating pair on doing this thing that we do up here, or nope, that's not healthy friction. That's, I messed up. I need to go invite Jackie for coffee and make a repair because I produced fiction because of my own ego stuff that wasn't helpful or healthy, right? That is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So on the micro level, we talk about the precision of disillusionment, figuring out which little things that you believe that are making the whole model not work right, about like where you're at in the world, where you're at in your life, what's going on, and you find that piece, oh, I thought I couldn't trust anyone ever. And if I take that piece out and I replace it with the piece that the wisdom tradition teaches, which is you have to start with trust, because if you start with mistrust, you never get there. And then I start to trust people, and I just calibrate the boundaries of my trust based on how they are, who they are, how they show up. I calibrate the boundaries of my trust, but nobody's forsaken. Nobody's just out of bounds. They all just need boundaries. Oh, suddenly I click that piece in, and my model starts working again, and I'm able to start strengthening relationship instead of destroying it. So there are lots of illusions. I talked about the illusion that we can do it by ourselves. There's the illusion of control. Anybody else struggle with that one? We just spent 4 days fasting in the high mountains of Big Bend, in part trying to take on the illusion of control, because on the fourth day, you just accept that whatever's going to happen is going to happen. It helps you loosen your grip on the idea that you're in charge of this show. It also highlights why paying attention to each and every sunrise and the cycles of the moon and the cycles of the season, when you're out in nature for a week, you realize why that was so important to our ancestors. If you're not paying attention to that stuff, you are uncomfortable all the time. And that's just for us people who have like a car or 2-mile hike away to retreat to. Probably dead is a better answer. Probably dead if you're not paying deep attention to the ecology in which you're existing, and the cycles of the sun and the moon and the water and all of it. We have a lot of blessings with our modern society, but our disconnection from the cycle of nature in our daily lives, I think on the whole, is overdone. I think we all need practices that we do daily or weekly that put us in touch with the earth and the moon and the tides and the nature, because the rest of it supports another version of this self that gets in our way of perception, this idea that humans are special and that humans aren't part of nature. Yeah. We do not become just by adding virtue. We become just by subtracting the self that blocks reality. Justice isn't a virtue we acquire, it's what becomes possible when the self stops distorting our perception of others and we see them as real. That's the whole move. The philosopher returns to the cave not out of duty, but because having seen reality, you can't not. Amen. Until next time, thank you for joining us on The Pulpiteer. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help others find it by liking and subscribing. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can make a donation at sangabrieluu.org/give. The Pulpiteer podcast is a production of the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Georgetown, Texas. The podcast is hosted by Spotify, and theme music is by John Faber. Our live recording tech crew this week was Frank Sanders, Rob Berthold, Keith Hutchinson, and Andre McDaniel. The podcast is produced and performed by Eric Hepburn.